Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening if you're tuning in from the Middle East. And welcome to the SafeConnection Expert Panel Series. If you're just tuning in, the purpose of these series was to provide, if you will, more of a reality perspective versus a theoretical perspective. And today's session is the third in the second series that we've done with the expert panels here in North America. And let me just read the session description, and then I'll introduce the panelists, and then we'll get going with it. And then about 15 minutes or 45 minutes from now, 15 minutes before the end, we'll start taking questions from the audience as they come in. So like I said, let me just get on with the session description, and then I'll introduce everybody. But injury prevention strategies for young workers and old workers. How do you deal with the two highest risk categories? Now, if you were with us on the last expert panel webinar, we were talking about excellent safety equals excellent business performance. Yes, but is it cause or is it correlation? And it was, I thought, one of the most interesting expert panels. But it sort of leads into this one a bit, which is there's no way that we can say that being old causes serious injuries and fatalities, even though it is highly correlated. So the sessions do kind of work together. But let me read the session. For over 30 years, safety professionals have been trying, and in many cases struggling, to come up with effective prevention strategies that work for young workers and for old workers. Typically, these are the two highest categories for recordable injuries. However, as we all know, not all recordable injuries are equal. Some are much more serious than others. And as an old safety pro once said, especially when I first got into the business, yeah, Larry, the young guys get hurt more than the old guys, but it's the old guys who die. Which might be true in upstream petroleum, but we all know that young drivers are the highest risk category for fatalities on the road, with the very experienced drivers coming in second. The point is, whether at work or driving to work, young workers and old workers have the most incidents and accidental injuries. However, the way you would talk or approach a worker with 15 to 20 years of experience would hopefully be different than somebody with 15 to 20 days. But you can't have different rules, procedures, or personal protective equipment standards. They all have to work within the same system. And then there's the concept or problem of repetitive stress and aging, which is just reality. And that comes right up against the 10-foot tall and bulletproof mentality of a young man, which is thankfully not so bad with most young women, but certainly the 10-foot tall and bulletproof when I was young. I don't feel so bulletproof anymore anyhow. So the idea is you can't differentiate with rules. They got to be the same with everybody. This problem isn't going away, but as I said to the panelists earlier, people get tired of old problems. We all kind of want to deal with new stuff, the new shiny object. But if you start looking at the data, it's really alarming in terms of just how many people, accidental fatalities to workers over 55 years old there are up there. So, like I said, the problem isn't going away, even if it isn't a brand new shiny object. So we're first going to talk about the pattern, and then all the panelists are going to get a chance to talk about what they've done in terms of effective strategies. And again, this is just what they're doing, everybody. It's not advice, okay? So hopefully you get some ideas that you like or confirm what you've been doing. And obviously a bit of a different perspective if it's something different. So starting at the top, at least on my screen, Peter Petroni, former director of health, safety, environment for AES, or American Electric. Peter works for us now as a, or works with us now as a senior consultant, but he was with AES for a long time. And this is a bit of a dubious caveat, Peter, but lead investigator on 27 fatals over the course of his career. So a lot of experience with this. Center of your screen at the bottom is Anthony Panapinto. I've never gotten Anthony's title right yet. Senior Director of Health, Safety, Environment with Procter & Gamble. But as Anthony said to me, maybe more focus on the health component. But please, elaborate and get that right, Anthony. But Anthony's been with us on all of the panels. He was also my guest on Larry Wilson Live. Last week, we were talking about pandemic management and to a certain extent mismanagement over the sixth and now seventh, well, sixth epidemic, the seventh pandemic. It was a great show, Anthony. Again, thanks so much. And bottom left-hand corner is David Bianco. David is the Director of Health, Safety, Environment for Epiroc. They make drilling equipment underground and surface, I guess, mining equipment, pretty much all over the world, and service everywhere there is mining all over the world. So David and I've known each other for a long time, and David was the first guest on Larry Wilson Live about a month ago when we were talking about corporate initiatives, corporate rollouts. And again, great show. And bottom right hand corner on my screen is Teg Matthews. Teg is a Vice President of Business Development with SafeStart, but don't hold that against him. Teg also, no. Teg brings a phenomenal amount of experience as well too, but he's holding focus groups. About 50 to 60 companies. Now, some of them come in and out over the course of the last couple of years, but it's about every 4 or 5 weeks, every month. And they are discussing a lot of the same topics that we've been discussing on the expert panel. So what Teg has also been able to provide for us is, if you will, sort of a general perspective from that group of companies as well, so that he can sort of, and I try to help with, I've been doing the panels, in the Middle East and in India and in Europe, so I can also bring in some of the perspective from those expert panel discussions as well. But if I could, David, let me start with you. As I wrote down here, you've been in industry for a while now, and I'm not sure exactly, I know it's more than 20 years, but not sure exactly how many. And I know you and I've talked about some of the serious injuries, very serious injuries to old workers, and also to some of the younger and experienced workers over the course of your career and at Epiroc. So just first of all I'm really trying to do is just make sure everybody has sort of noticed that there is an issue with the young workers and the old workers. And, once I can kind of quickly get around and, if you will, confirm the pattern, then we can start getting into the effective prevention strategy. So, David, what did you notice over first of all, how many years has it been, and did you notice the pattern over all those years?
43 years in manufacturing, and almost 33 with my current company. So I thought about this a lot, Larry, since you brought it up as a topic. And the company I'm currently with enjoyed a situation where we had really high retention levels of people. Even when we had layoffs and things, same people would come back. So we had a lot of the, I'll say, older workers, more senior workers. And so in the last 3 to 5 years, that has started to change some because of attrition Some of them are getting as old as me or older, and they're getting into the retirement years. And so we had a really unique new challenge when this came up, because I think I've told you the story one time when one of the new guys came in. He was a kid. He hadn't done a lot of work. He had some mechanical aptitude, but so a guy told him to go get a bolt, and he said, "You want this one, or do you want me to supersize it to this one?" So he had worked at like McDonald's before he had come there. So we knew we had a challenge. So really, we really had to start with a totally different baseline. What I call the zero expectations, zero knowledge, zero baseline with them, and build them up from nowhere. And
Okay, all
so
right.
very
So
different.
look, so you noticed it certainly with the young ones too. I mean, because I heard this when I first got out work, in the oil patch when it was booming, and they said the trouble is once we've got all the kids from the farm, they kind of had a sense of things. Once we start getting the kids from McDonald's, it's not nearly so good, right? Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Waddingham, he told me he wouldn't be able to get here till just the last minute. Dr. Watt and I've done many expert panels together in person and since COVID started remotely, I think about 18 around the world. Thanks very much, Wada, for making the time. And like I said with everybody, just trying to establish the beginning of the pattern, Wada. And I know you haven't been around maybe 43 years like David, because you're only 48. So, but have you know? Well, I started really young. But did you notice, like, since you started the same problem, like the young, inexperienced workers, the older workers, those being the two highest risk categories?
Yeah, thanks, and it's always a pleasure to be with you. Thanks, Larry, for inviting us. Nice to see you all again. I tell you, I mean, the problems in the Middle East are a bit different because they're very unique to different parts. But you probably have the same kind of thing in North America as well. So there are places like Oman where there's more nationalization, a lot of younger people coming in, and I remember when I was doing some research around the governance and leadership piece. I was talking to at the time the CEO of Petroleum Development Oman, and they had a lot of obviously younger Omanis. The issue wasn't only with the workers. The PDO operates a concession area which is bigger than the United Kingdom, yeah, in terms of landmass. That's just a concession area in Oman. So they would travel, the amount of kilometers that they would actually clock every day was equal to the distance between Earth and the Moon, right? That's how much driving. So their biggest problem was actually the driving. And in this part of the world, in terms of safety and the perception of safety, and with the indigenous or the local younger population, the biggest safety issues that we've had really have been related to driving. If it is Saudi, if it is the UAE, at one time it was the second. Well, for younger than 25, it was the first reason for death between the younger male Emiratis, which was.
Well, that's really interesting because it is the same here. Only they just really, I mean, it's been the biggest sweep under the rug. I remember one year in British Columbia, it's because we got a lot of forest products, and it was 48 deaths or 43 deaths in the first 6 months in June in the bush. And so they were going to make everybody with a chainsaw hand logger become certified because of the fatalities. Now, some of these guys have been fallen trees for 20, 30 years, right? So, but half of those fatalities were in pickup trucks on logging roads or in logging trucks. And they didn't, again, motor vehicles, but since that was outside of the Ministry of Labor jurisdiction or outside of OSHA, back to what we can do, certify the faller. So very interesting. And thanks for that. Anthony, if I could, what did you, I don't know how many years you've been in industry, Anthony. I know it's probably more than 20 for sure, maybe not 43 like David, but
Absolutely, you're off, Larry. So it's actually, this will be my 35th year out of graduate school. So I am older, hopefully, than I look by your comment. But
oh well.
it's much the same observation, that, you know, again, when we think of risk in terms of fatal injuries, have the same observations as the other experts on the panel. I would talk about specifically as well as we observe it if you think about musculoskeletal injuries. You know, in the elder population, a lot of it is about fatigue and losses. You know, aging is really about gains and losses. I gain wisdom, I gain experience, but I lose physical resilience. And you know, in the younger population, I have a lot of physical resilience, but I may not have the savvy to recognize the risks that I'm undertaking. So we even see that dichotomy in terms of ergonomic and musculoskeletal injuries. There's this dynamic, so you can't have one size fits all fix because you have these discrepancies between age groups, and it really is being cognizant of those differences. And you know, that drives leadership requirements to be different and how you think about that. You know, training, if you think about convincing a young worker not to overlift and making sure that people who are older and more experienced, who may have physical wear and tear, again, that they understand the limitations of their own body. So I think you know, that's my perspective on more of a health side, but I also have observed that in my career because I've done a broad HS&E. It just so happens in my current role, I focus on health and preventive medicine.
Right on, right on. Okay, Peter. I mean, again, I hate to. I don't know if always, you know, like I'm getting to the point where you're going, you know, you go, yeah, ditto what everybody else says. But with a high risk industry, you know, I can remember Bruce Miller at BC Hydro saying, you know, Larry, we've always, you know, you can't be too quick at things, I think was what he said around, you know, like, you know, because you're not quicker than the electricity, no reflexes. So he said, you know, we've always been aware of guys that moved a bit too quickly, but it was always difficult to intervene by saying, hey, slow down, right? Because obviously there's a certain emphasis on productivity that needs to be maintained over the course of the year, right? So first of all, did you notice the pattern at American Electric, young workers, old workers, and specifically the pattern as it relates to serious injuries and fatalities?
Well, thanks for having me back, Larry, especially after the technical problems we had last time. And
Oh,
I also admire you for asking me to be on, and then 30 minutes or maybe 30 seconds before we started, asked me if I had any answers to the questions you were going to ask me. But yes, I do. So
I just, like I said, Peter, I won't do it when we're mountain climbing. Well, I just figured you can do anything, Peter. Yeah, right.
no, I appreciate it. And so, yeah, you know, a few things. You know, certainly we observe the pattern from the literature. You know, we try to keep up on current events, and you know, as we talked earlier, Larry, you have to have a big enough database to really kind of determine whether there's really a pattern there. But you know, kind of anecdotally, yes, we did have you know, serious injuries for the newer folks and for the older folks, and you know, we'll get in a little bit about, you know, maybe why and what we did. But one of the things that we thought about, and this was even aside from injury reduction, serious injury reduction, and just business planning, that we saw kind of a shift in the demographics of our businesses where, you know, I've been around almost as long, maybe a little bit longer than Anthony, maybe not quite as long as David. And remember the days when we had the luxury to bring new guys into the business and give them enough time to get acclimated, work with the older guys, and so they could really get their footing before they started doing more high risk activities. But I think, and I see David shaking his head, that, you know, demographics in industry right now and the business climate doesn't give businesses that luxury. So you've got guys working longer than they would normally work. And the guys that are coming in, those new guys that are coming in to, you know, kind of carry the staff, don't have as much time. So you have to be very, very pragmatic and judicious about how you onboard those guys and get them to the level of expertise that they need to be to engage in those hazardous activities. So that's kind of what, and you know, to kind of short answer your question is, yes, we've seen the pattern, but you know, you really have to take that data and use it in a constructive way, right? You can't make assumptions about why older folks or younger folks. It's easy to jump to that conclusion that the older guys are doing it because of complacency and the younger guys are doing it because of the 10-foot tall and bulletproof. And I would agree that that does play some role in that, but there are other factors, and you have to have a way to kind of look at the other factors and address the issue holistically.
Well, I mean, you know, when I started out, I was selling videotapes, you know, in the oil patch, and wherever I went, if the young workers had been hurt, like you could sell the tapes for the training, right? But you get somewhere and they go, Larry, you know, the old guys, you know, like, and you could kind of, you'd be like, okay, well, this isn't going to go well. You know, I'm not going to be selling any videotapes today. That's for sure, right? But it would take me years, like before I even had the beginning of an explanation, and then, you know, to be able to actually go full circle and be able to prove it, like you said, Peter, is always, you know, it's tricky. I mean, you know, empirically, yes, I can sort of prove it, but it's still difficult, you know, to get it to the granular level all the time. Like, what is it about being old? Well, it's that you can do an awful lot more of the job without thinking about it, right? And then if you've got periods here and there where you're not looking at it either, you've just got more defenseless moments, right? But then when you actually look through the reports, you see blatant disregard of basic safety practices too, that 25 years of complacency would be the reason that the person wouldn't have a fall arrest harness in a bucket. So, you know, it's like you said, it's hard to get conclusive when you start you really got to get at a lot of data here. David, let me let's move to the crux of this too, because I think the people attending are attending because they're aware that there's a problem with young workers and old workers, and I think what they want to hear probably is a bit idealistic, and that I'm not suggesting there's going to be a silver bullet that comes out of this show, but maybe a few ideas though that everybody can you know, look at or at least consider seriously. So when you notice the pattern and you realize that, okay, this is going to require different strokes for different folks, and yet we're limited, you know, how did you go about attacking this, and what were some of your initial strategies, and maybe a bit of, if you will, how it worked, you know?
Okay. So the first thing I'd say is, as I said, we had a very stable workforce over many, many, many years in terms of older folks who'd stayed with the company and were very seasoned. So on that end of the equation, I think one of the strategies was to get them involved very personally in doing job hazard analysis work, so that they would be part of the evaluation of what in fact was happening. And so when we did that, and we'd have somebody engaged with them, the safety engineer or whoever, there would be things they would see that maybe the other person who had the seniority didn't see in it. And they would say, oh yeah, you're right. You know, I just didn't recognize that piece of metal brackets right above my head and those kind of things. And so we tried to blend some of the experience and non-experience to evaluate and fit better our ability to identify hazards. We also, I think, employed, and I call it, I think it's in a SafeStart video, that little voice, I call it, because I basically tell these guys, when you hear that little voice, listen to it. And I tell the new guys.
That was the most unscientific thing. It took me a year to publish that thing because, and then I don't know if I told you, I was writing a bit of it in the airport at Heathrow, and there was a pilot sitting beside me, and he just sort of was looking over, and he said, "What are you doing?" And I was just talking to him about, I said, I don't know about this. And he told me the story about his squadron leader for the Red Arrows. That morning in the shower, he got the little voice feeling saying, I shouldn't go flying today. But he was the captain, like the squadron leader. He didn't want to go and tell you, I heard a little voice in the shower, so we're not practicing today. He crashed his plane and he will be in a wheelchair for the rest of his life. So he said, write that. I don't care how unscientific, he said, publish it. He said, there isn't a person you can talk to who hasn't heard that little voice. And I'm
Yeah.
like, oh, yeah, just wait till you're not the one who's going to get all the critics. But anyhow,
Yeah.
I went ahead and did it. Tag,
But just to follow, can I just quickly just give you one quick tidbit? So the other issue is with the young guys, we tell them very specifically, if you're with an older person that tells you to do something and it's okay, and you hear the little voice, you definitely need to not do it because they're not listening to their little voice.
That's a really, well, yes, I never would have thought of that.
Yeah.
Tag, sorry, just again, I don't want to flog a dead horse, but the old and young workers, again, same pattern from the focus group. They've all had to pretty much deal with it. Have they been asking you for specific strategies, or have they offered any?
It's interesting. So if we can just look back for a second, so the pattern that everyone's talking about, that's the pattern. That's the pattern everyone's talking about. The quote that you said is the young guys who get hurt, and then the old ones that get killed, right? And that's it's almost a law, right? Everyone recognizes that, right? Everyone understands it. This piece around experience is super interesting too, right?
I mean, to quote Bill Bryson, does this mean that over 55 we're irredeemably doomed to become a cropper? I mean, you know, it just,
I think
it almost seems like it statistically.
Well, experience. What everyone seems to understand, I think, is that experience is our friend, but it's also can be our enemy as well, right? So that, and it's a lot of organizations have done a lot of work on this, and they seem to think that when you've had an employee for around about 3 years, you know, they kind of seen all the exposures, they understand things, that they're operating well, but it seems to, a lot of organizations believe that it seems to peak out at that kind of level. Once you get past that, you're more likely to find things kind of going wrong, right? So the language that we were using as complacency earlier on, I used a lovely little phrase actually a couple of minutes ago, that you know that when we're looking at the job, we do the job more automatically. We don't have to think so hard when we're doing it, right? So I think a lot of organizations understand that. In terms of the strategies that people have been trying to do it, I think we've heard 2 or 3 people sort of dip into that pond already. There's this idea of buddying up with older people, but then, as David was just saying, making sure that if that little voice in my head is telling me, actually, Teggy, I know this guy's telling you to do this, but does this seem safe? Does it seem like you're allowed to question, creating the culture for that to happen? But really, it's how do we get people up to that level of experience as quickly as possible, but in a controlled fashion, so that, you know, because the problem that a lot of organizations have when they buddy up with people, as we all know, is sometimes the more experienced people, they might have got used to doing things by taking shortcuts. So it's how do you manage that? How do you make sure that the message that the new guys are receiving is what you want? And it's something that a lot of organizations wrestle with.
Well, but you've obviously got to have the, I'm going to say, the administrative or the luxury, I don't know, luxury, the ability to buddy up, right? Like, as you were saying, David, it's not as easy sometimes now, just the demographics being what they are. But if you do buddy up, the idea of listening to that little voice, good and bad, certainly is key. Dr. Wada, what, I mean, especially in the, you know, oil and gas industry, but feel free to take it beyond there.
Yep.
Effective strategies, and you know, what, you know, did it, you know, how did it work, all the rest of it, I guess.
So I've got a few points to make here with regards to young and old, but it's not about young and old. I want to go back to the whole issue of the human being, right? So I think the difference is very, very simply, because, you know, it's a very wide, very big subject, is that, you know, you've got older and younger people. What's the difference? The risk is the same, right? So when we do a calculation of risk, the risk is the same. So here it's just the perception of risk. So what do we do in companies generally when we do some safety training? So we've got a guy who's going to do welding. Do we actually, and I'm not talking about the person who's doing the training, might actually take into consideration that he's training someone who's older or younger. What he's going to do is he's going to take the training material which has been designed, and he's going to train the older person and the younger person, you know, without prejudice, right? He's going to train them on the same material. So I'm not saying that people should be training with prejudice, but they should be training with understanding that the perception of risk and really understanding, you know, having that contextual understanding of risk with older people who suffer more from complacency, whereas with younger people who really can't actually, they don't really understand the risk because of the lack of experience. So that's the first point. The second point is there's going to be a real challenge in the years to come as we keep older people, oil and gas, like other industries, like David was talking about. We're going to, you know, the retirement is going to, we live longer. So, and we're going to be working longer as well. So with the new technologies which are coming in and the logic of the systems and digitization and all that, that's going to become a challenge. One thing I do want to talk about, and you know, we have our colleague Salman, who sits on the Middle East panel. He's doing a PhD actually on socio-technical basically stuff and how it relates to human factors and relates to leadership. So I just want to read out to you something. This is from a recent publication that you know about, Larry, on human factors, right? Process safety management. So I just want to read this out. It says here, although there is a need to understand human weaknesses, there is also a need to recognize the strength that comes from having the human within the system. There are many assumptions about human performance and often a lack of foresight or forethought given to humans not performing as expected. Therefore, one of the roles of the human factors analyst during a HAZOP and more generally is to challenge the perception of the human as always performing as expected. Another role is to actively and systematically seek out human vulnerabilities. So when we, and this is sort of the point, that our leaders in our organizations need to understand that we have a challenge with different types of workforce. So we want to get younger people in. Okay, we're going to train them. They probably cost us a bit less, so let's bring younger people. We incorporate different types of risks, and we need to just understand that the risk is different, and one size does not fit all. So if I train everybody on the same damn material that I've trained everybody on, that is not the way to overcome. So leadership need to understand this. And the last point I'd like to say is that at the end of the day,
differentiate the training though, a lot of that. I think that's a great that's a great suggestion. I mean, you're not. I mean,
I've not seen. Sorry, Larry. I've not come across an organization ever, and I've audited several. I've never come. Maybe our colleagues here online would have seen this, but I've never ever gone to an organization which has said, well, no, actually, you know, we've got this training material, but you know, we have a different variant, and this variant we use with young people.
I've never either.
Okay. So just one last point, and very important point also, Larry. You know, a lot of people think that the actions of people, human beings, and you know this very well because you know you always say 5 seconds. You know, think about 5 seconds before you do something. It's not about your brain. It's not about your brain. It is about your heart. And people do things, stupid things like, for example, you know, the best example of this I can give is confined space entry incidents where 3-4 people die. Yeah, the first guy goes in, gets knocked out. The next guy goes in. He knows that he's not supposed to go in, but it's his heart that drives him to go to try to save his buddy, and then he ends up dying with him. And then the third guy comes in and he says, oh well, I've got 2 people now. Actually, if he sat there and he logically thought about it, I've got 2 bodies down there. Definitely there's absolutely no bloody way that I'll be able to carry any of them out anyway, and the chance of me going in there is 99% I'm going to die. Yeah, because I'll probably die of the same gas or the lack of oxygen.
It is, yeah.
It is in there, but people don't do that, and people just keep on going. And you got, you know, and they behave like lemmings, right? You know lemmings, you know that game, Lemmings. Yeah, so they behave like lemmings. But why? It's because it's the heart. So when we train people, we try to train them up here, but what we should be training them to think about is also think about here. And it's not about, oh, you need to go back to your wife tonight, you need to go back to your kids tonight. No, you need to think about, you need to use your heart to understand what you are doing, right? That you need to resist your, this overflow of emotions that overcome you when you see your friend in dire straits inside a tank, that you don't jump in there and succumb to your death. So
we like, I'm real big on this self-trigger word for all that. Exactly. But that's certainly exactly, no, it's exactly what you're saying. You could come back to the moment and think I remember Mike Coulter saying that to me, if I just had to stop and thought for a second, Larry, but that's the problem with rushing, is you're in a rush, so you don't stop and think. I think it's Anthony, if I could, I'd just ask you what, you started a bit with some of the ergonomic strategies you talked about, and also, may segue a bit maybe into the technology part of it. Do you want to just elaborate on that again,
Yeah,
or a bit more?
Yeah, and I totally agree with what's been said about, training and really making an impression on people. And we use a phrase here, we want to capture both heart and mind with any safety training that we do. So I think that recognizes what Dr. Ghanem said. We're going through a training revolution right now within our HS&E group at P&G, and we've recognized there is a divide in how people learn, how technology plays in learning. And we've recruited in some, young engineers and training associates to say, hey, what could we do better to deal with that age demographic and the differences in how people have learned in the past and how younger people have learned now, recognizing that technology can be a huge benefit. Also, as I talked, previous to our discussion here, everybody deals with technology differently. I mean, people, and I'll be the first one to admit it, I'm 55 years old, I'm a digital migrant. I think stuff is really cool, but don't ask me to program many things because I don't have an aptitude, but younger people do. So we have our aging workforce that's developing new skills and being distracted by technology because they're reaching. And then we've got people who are digital, natives, who they rely so much on digital technology that it can become distracting in a different way. So I think we have to recognize that as safety professionals. The other perspective, we've talked a lot about human factors, but I would go back to physical factors, and it's some of the things that we've tried to do. And I agree with David on being widely inclusive on JSAs, because everybody should understand the hazard in their own context. And I'll cite an example here regarding, I had a situation where I had a process upset of ozone, and I had somebody pretty significantly exposed, and we were very lucky not to lose them, and it took months and months of advanced respiratory therapy for them to recover. Fortunately, they were 26 years old and a marathon runner. They had resilience built into their pulmonary space. And I always, when I do incident reviews, I tend to go to the leadership first and say, well, why do you think the incident occurred? And I had a lot of people giving me a lot of runaround on, well, we probably should have done this. And I said, it came down to hazard recognition. And the fact is, you don't even recognize it. And had it been you at your age, you would have definitely died from this exposure.
Right.
And that resonated with that team. And I think we've really gotten better at that. But it is raising those predispositions, whether it be younger people who've been wearing earbuds coming into the workforce with more hearing decompensation, and older people suffering from age-related hearing loss. So everybody needs to be protected, to those specific fatigue-related outcomes. Decades ago, I could do an 11-stop tour around Asia, going and doing a health check or an audit at 11 plants in 3 weeks. I'd die if I tried to do that today just from the jet lag. So I recognize my own limitations, and I think we have to build in that discussion and some of those predispositions. And COVID has taught us this. I mean, the most sensitive people in the population have been the very aged. The carriers have been of all other age groups, And really, if you look at advancing our protocols in the workplace, what we've really done is had that discussion. You need to behave in a certain way 24/7 in terms of spreading this virus. And those of you who are in the elderly or sensitive age group, you need to be even more cognizant of those contacts that you're having, both inside and outside of work, and take our protocols seriously. So I think these are all good examples. So there's the cognitive piece, there's a training piece, and then there's this recognition that we have to be honest with people, not biased, but be honest with people about physical aging, creating fatigue as another issue, setting complacency and other things aside.
And or just honest about the dynamic of being young and inexperienced. You're going to make more mistakes, and there's a natural human tendency to rush to make up for the time you wasted with the mistake. So I always think it's funny when you'll hear safety professionals lament about the young workers, that they're rushing because they're really good workers or they want to get the job done. And I remember me going, well, I was one of those young workers and I basically get the job done. But obviously, if you screwed up, then you'd be rushing for sure because you didn't want to get yelled at and you didn't want to be holding the crew up. But all of those dynamics aren't necessarily known to everybody, or have it all thought through. But when it's really important, certainly the first thing, David, you were saying is you can mentor them up, right? You can listen to a little voice. Dr. Wada said you can certainly differentiate within reason the training, because you're not, saying you're old and you're getting discriminated against. You're just trying to tailor things better, which makes, I think, perfect sense to me. And then, as Anthony was saying, you can also stress like certain things, like especially COVID now for the older people. What I would get at is one more point just before I get to Peter, and that is when it's really important, like so many safety outcomes are negative, right? But it's not like the only tool we have is negative reinforcement, which is you've got to be unilateral then. Old and young, everybody's got to be the same. But when you're using positive reinforcement, especially if it is a genuine, meaningful conversation, typically on a good safety observation, for instance, you can achieve that kind of rapport. Now you can tailor the positive reinforcement to really hedge your bets that behavior, the good behavior, will continue. So that you're, if you were whatever, Anthony, whatever positive reinforcement for the social distancing, the wearing the mask, really appreciate it because, not only are you keeping the older folks safe here, but you're setting a great example for the younger folks. You can tailor that positive reinforcement to be very genuine, but also to really give you a good shot at getting that behavior repeated, right? So that's my 2 cents worth for how you could differentiate for the old workers and the young workers. But what did you guys do, Peter, at American Electric? Did you differentiate the training, mentoring systems, some of the things mentioned so far, or?
We did all of those things, Larry, and I think that, the way I would kind of think about this, I think, if you're going to advise executive leadership about how to think about this, I think some of the things that we did right was, one, taking a disciplined approach to how we looked at the problem. Using Six Sigma or process excellence, something that's going to give you a good disciplined way to look at it. The second lesson that we learned is that you can't rely on the easy answers, right? When you start going through these disciplined processes, some solutions are going to start to come to you, and you can't stop there. You have to keep digging. And something Dr. Wada said was very, very important for us. Once we got to the understanding that there are human factors involved here, yeah, it is partly the training, but generally people make bad decisions for a noble reason, right? Like you said, going into the
predictable reasons, though.
Predictable reasons, right? So having a disciplined approach, not relying on the easy answers, keep digging, and certainly consider the human factors. And then the last thing I would say especially for, you know, the listeners that have global operations, the answers are going to be different from business to business. We try to come up with a consistent way to handle these types of things, but you really have to, you know, kind of paint the lines on the side of the road and let each individual business and even within a country, for example, in Brazil, the human factors that are affecting somebody in the northern part of the country might be different than they're affecting the folks in the southern part of the company. And so the policies, procedures, programs that you come up with have to have that flexibility for the local human factors, for lack of a better term. So that's kind of the, you know, the way I would think about it.
Okay, for sure. All right. And Tag, again, anything I missed sort of in the, like my semi-summary there, but also what from the focus groups on this, like any other strategies that you've sort of heard? We heard the mentoring, the differentiating the training, anticipating the human factors in the overall process, I think was kind of what you were saying, Wada, right? Like, in other words, you know, the older folks are going to be more prone to complacency and those sorts of issues. And, you know, the younger folks are going to probably be more prone to rushing and or fatigue, depending on lifestyle. I don't want to assume every young person in the world partied their face off like I do, but you know, there certainly has been a general tendency for that age group, I've noticed. So what's the focus group been saying, Tag?
Well, I think actually you've oh yes, what I want.
No, I'd like to ask you just to add to Larry. I'm really interested because obviously you've had some very good international experience and you've been exposed to a lot of data which has come in from so many different parts of the world. And what Peter was saying about it being different even in the same country with different groups of people, it'd be really interesting to get your insights on that, you know?
Yeah, I think it's funny you say that, Wada, because what Pete just said about understanding it, and Pete said, I think Pete's words were, answers are different between business to business, and I think there's a huge amount of truth in that, right? And then when you start looking at it from a more of a global kind of perspective or a regional kind of perspective, you know, you have to understand that, but it's basically all about talking to people, isn't it? It's understanding, again, to summarize both something that you said and Pete said, understand the issues because people make bad decisions for good reasons. And when you were talking about hearts and minds and all that, we've all been and we've all heard about these terrible incidents, exactly like what you described, where someone's gone into an enclosed space, something terrible has happened, his buddy's gone in to get him, something's happened, and you know, and you logically you question how it could possibly happen, but you know, it's how do we fight these things? And so it's understanding it, it's making sure that people have the right skills. What Larry was talking about, you know, mentoring, positive reinforcement, feedback, the appropriate training, not skimping on training, because you know, making sure that you know we're winning people's minds over their heart, really, to make sure that I don't have any sort of military background, but what military people tell me is part of the reason they do so much training is that they train it so it becomes a second nature, right? So the training kind of takes over, right? And that's essentially what we want to get to. You know, Larry said a couple of very, very important things about not rushing it. We just touched really on induction at one point, which I think there's a whole piece around that. And then it's understanding how humans and systems interact, right? Making sure that our systems are as good as they can be, but making sure that we understand that just because a system is beautifully designed, it doesn't mean that the human's going to interact with it exactly as we would think that they would, right? And understanding that piece. I think all of this is true, and it's all these pieces that organizations wrestle with. And when we throw in what Anthony was talking about earlier on about, you know, fatigue, the age, being honest, I think was your phrase, Anthony, about the fact that bluntly, I'm not as hard and as tough as I was, well, probably a year ago, let alone sort of 20 years ago. Right? It's that recognition, right? So, hey, I think I'm the oldest one here. But no, it's understanding that and understanding it personally as well as organizationally, and that's a different thing again, right? So it's making sure that we hit all that stuff.
Well, Tag, it's an excellent point about the training and not skimping in the training. I mean, it wasn't the first conference that Dr. Wada and I met, I think it was the second one in India at the Gale conference. And somebody was talking about a plant manager that started, it was the isopropylene plant, I think, Wada, that blew the whole thing up because they didn't do the checks. And of course, they, you know, their answer was hang this guy from the highest tree. And I'm saying, well, you know, what about the human? Like, he didn't get to be that. He didn't get that job by making one bad decision after another. Everybody, think about it. Why that day did he make that decision? There's human factors involved here. I mean, you don't get to be the plant manager of, you know, $500 million worth of assets by being a complete idiot all the way along, right? You know, you have to be in sales, right? Tag for that kind of thing to work out for you. But no, it's just, but no.
But Larry, in saying that, to your point, we do say that people have made the mistake. They were part of the barrier, but one of the case studies from the same book, actually from the same chapter by Jeanette, says the strength of the human in the system. So she refers to that in 2009, the US flight 1549 that left LaGuardia Airport to New York with 155 people and then destined to Seattle, when just 3 minutes there was a bird strike from a flock of Canadian geese. So, you know, Canadians were the reason, huh? At an altitude of about 3,000 feet, right? So both engines failed. And anyway, we know the story. You know, the captain went and the first officer, they had very precious time, very little time, made critical decisions about the safest way to manage this unfolding catastrophe. They determined that there was insufficient thrust in the engines to reach LaGuardia, so the alternative was another airport, but they must avoid crashing into the densely populated city. The decision was then taken to land on the Hudson River, right? And about 90 seconds after the Mayday call, the plane made an unpowered ditch, you know, resulting in no fatalities. In this event, the engineered system failed completely, and there was no safety net to avoid a catastrophe. It was the human element that made up for these deficiencies, and we know very well that one of the reasons that this Captain Sillenberger was able to do that is he was obviously a military pilot. But what he used is situational leadership, and he said, "Hey, listen, man, you know, I've got to do this." But I tell you one thing, yeah, I mean, I don't know, you know, he must have been thinking not only with his heart and his mind, he was probably thinking with another part of his anatomy at that point in time, you know, but he, you know, but he did it. And so sometimes human intervention, we blame human intervention for blowing things up but in so many cases, I think that we have a missed opportunity to learn from so many catastrophes and things and incidents which are actually stopped because of human intervention at the right time. But they're just unsung heroes or whatever, you know, they're people that.
As I said, you can differentiate with positive reinforcement without any issues. One of the questions that we had come in, and it is from, pardon me if I get your name wrong, Naomi Chumo Caps, I think. And she's just, does anyone have a challenge where HR frowns upon pairing people up based on age, as some sort of ageism, workplace discrimination type of issue? And
Larry, let me jump in there because I saw that one pop in, and I think that you know, the way to structure this, and our training system is structured in this way anyway. Your safety onboarding, your business onboarding, your technical onboarding is driven by the skill blocks of the person that's onboarding you. So it's not about age, it becomes about experience. And I think it should always be about experience versus the guy who's been around the most years but doesn't have those skills is the one that gets to do the training. So I think if you construct it on a skill block basis, you avoid any perception, any legal perception or subjective perception that this is about, you know, age and not experience and not about skill block capability. So that's what I would share in response to that question.
Brilliant. Actually, that makes perfect sense to me, Anthony. There was another question from Kevin Cobb, and this was about the younger workers just taking chances or doing things. He was referring to the if you will, the overzealous component of the 10-foot tall and bulletproof to try to impress. And I did hear of more of that a long time ago. First 10, like 30 years, so first 10 years, more of that. Not as much lately. Anybody care to comment on that one? Peter, David,
Don't see that a lot, really. Yeah, it's different these days. I think kids can drift from job to job more freely, it seems like. And I get a question in my mind of frankly, the seriousness of what they take away from what they're doing. Because they can be there, they're there to collect a check, of course. But my concern becomes one of if they become complacent to the degree of disinterest today, not the opposite. It's just really different. They're more worried about getting to that phone again to check those texts and things of that nature. That's the thing we have to guard against the most, frankly, in the last 3 or 4 years. It just seems like it's just like work is an inconvenience.
I remember when I first got into this business, and this is like really a long time ago, but I was looking after maintenance seminars, maintenance, organization management, preventive predictive maintenance, planning and scheduling of maintenance. And I remember at the hospitality suite, Neil Taylor saying, "Did I ever tell you the story, Larry, of how I lost my wee finger?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Well, I'm a millwright, and I put her into the bandsaw. It was just hanging there, and I'm on my way to the hospital with the security guard." And he says, "It's too bad you didn't cut it all the way off." And I said, "Why?" He says, "Oh, you would have got $5,000. So he said, with that, he said, I just reached down, he said, and I pulled it real hard, rolled down the window, and I pitched my wee finger. And now I'm a millwright." And I actually had that, this was right into passage. I have not heard that or felt it with young workers in over 10 years at all. Like, if they see somebody like that, they just look at them like, well, whatever, but I'm not losing my fingers. And maybe to your point, David, because I need them all to play my video game. I'm sorry, I'm being trite here, but you do need your thumbs to play those game consoles, that's for sure. Any final comments, Teg? We got to wrap up. Had a few comments about technology and how you could actually like reverse mentor the older folks. If any of you done any of that, where you've got like what's happening with me and Hunter and Mike, where they are like reverse mentoring me and teaching me how to do more than just talk on a phone now. They're not successful or anything, but they're working at it. But have you done any of that, Wada, where you got the young people to sort of turn around and reverse mentor any of the older folks?
No, but I must tell you this. I must tell you this fascinating, funny story. Very very close to my family, my father and my son. So I was it was one Saturday afternoon, and my dad was around. He was staying with us, and my son was there. And then I said to my son was about, I think, 8 or 9 years at the time. And I said to him, "Listen, son, you're going to hang around with Grandpa because I've got to go down and go see the Chinese physiotherapist for an hour. So I'll be about an hour and a half because I've got to go down the road. We'll be back." And then he said, "No, you're not going anywhere." And I said, "Why not?" He goes, "What am I going to do?" I said, No, Grandpa's here, man. You're going to sit down with him, and he's going to sit down with you and explain to you, ask him questions, have a nice conversation with him. He's a very knowledgeable man." And he said, No, listen, if you're going to go on one condition, you take his mobile away. I said, "What?" He goes, "Yeah, you take his smartphone away." I said, "Why?" Because he goes, "Grandpa just sits there playing with his WhatsApp all the time. He's driving me nuts, So this was my 8-year-old or 9-year-old son complaining about his, at the time, 77-year-old grandfather, and my dad had got into doing these WhatsApps, and he writes to a lot of people around the world. And my dad, is an intellectual, so he reads and writes a lot. So he's got this patience, he's got this big smartphone, and now he can connect with the whole world. And it drove my son nuts, because we brought up my son. My son doesn't. I mean, he has a phone, but he doesn't use it all the time. He just uses it when he goes out and stuff. And it was very, very difficult. So it was just a funny story about, you were saying reverse mentoring in older and younger people. I just wanted to share that story. So
I remember telling the same thing to Gary Higbee. I said, "Hey Gary, look, I know you're probably in better shape than you've ever been. Well, maybe not since college. He's sharp. He's a great presenter." I said, "But just to get away from sort of any kind of old guy stigma," I said, "as long as you've got like the best, fanciest IT," I said, "the young people will all be going, ooh, look at his Mac, look at his speakers, everything like that. He's got the cool guy pointer." I said, "You'll just leapfrog yourself. You'll be instantly in the cool guy category." He said, "Okay." Well, then he gets his smartphone, and just like your father, Wada, the next thing you know, it's like, Gary, get off the phone. Like, we're working here, Gary. So yeah, it quickly can turn on you. Thank you very much, gentlemen. I really like the ideas, the buddying up, certainly, and even a bit of the reverse mentoring, being able to look at the human factors in advance, and obviously start trying to tailor. I think you brought this up a bit as well. Tailor some of your approach to it. And Anthony, you were saying, but both from repetitive stress and from a health point of view, obviously you've got to help. You've got to sort of stress the reality of it. I mean, I don't think you need to cross any HR boundaries at all. I think, like you guys were saying, but obviously the way you're going to talk to somebody who's young about lifting is going to be a lot different than the person who's already got the muscle relaxers in the glove compartment of their pickup truck. They know how much it hurts, right? So it's definitely going to be different. So thank you again, Peter and David and everybody very much for this. I hope you can all join us for the next one. I believe it is January the 20th. I just confirm that in a second. If I could see. January 21st, actually, same time, 1 p.m. Eastern. And this is probably going to be one of the most controversial or interesting of all the expert panels, and that is, how do you balance just culture and accountability? And I've heard too many people theorize on this, and then have the luxury of just getting back on the plane and flying home to the university or whatever. Whereas if you've got to go back and live with the consequences of these things, these are very serious. I mean, you've got to do all of this right. You can lose the baby with the bathwater so easily, and yet to have no accountability at all isn't something that I think any of us would be recommending. So hopefully you can all join us for that same time, 1 p.m. Eastern, on January 21st. And all to everybody as well, very best holiday season, and stay safe and stay healthy. And maybe let me just stay healthy first, safe second. I don't know. Dead from COVID, dead in a car wreck, you're still dead, I guess, so it's really difficult to say one's more important than the other, but that extra guard up for the health thing.
Thank you, Wada.
Merry Christmas.
Take care,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Bye-bye, everybody. Thanks so much.
Bye.
Okay.
Bye.
Thanks.
Next time.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.